The betrayal of the macrocosm within the microcosm is the act of all magical tradition. A form of reverential mimicry, the magus seeks to emulate what is observed in the natural patterns of nature and to recreate the acts of nature on a local scale, a task achieved through ritual. This ritual is the foundation of religion in all of its forms. The practice of religious worship is the practice of magic. Take as an example the sacrament of the Eucharist. This consuming of bread and wine holds esoteric value, meaning that it is symbolic by nature, found through an exegesis of the doctrine. While admittedly, any one practice, moreover, any one piece of symbolism can be dissected so as to seemingly produce a never-ending stream of possible meanings, we can definitively assert in this instance of the Eucharist that one meaning of the consuming of bread, referred to as the body of Christ, is symbolic of taking in of the grain of the land itself being the body of God, which is to say, to take the essence of God into oneself. Thus, the individual is sustained through the Spirit of God. The wine or blood of Jesus has too many potential meanings, but this wine is too directly linked to the reaping of the land. This, the vine, the grapes that are harvested through viticulture, and the sweet wine that is produced through their fermentation. This is the so-called blood of God, and it is thus intoxicating. It is a delicacy only enjoyed through the practice of the harvest. Moreover, through the passing of seasons, with each season bringing a phase of life, a phase of action, and a phase of reward. This is the cyclical nature of life, embodied in the bread and wine of the Eucharist. This is the tradition of magic, and in this particular instance, it is a tradition that well over a quarter of the population of Earth practices. That's an awful lot of magi. Clearly, this tradition of the Eucharist is not Christian by nature. It is a universal representation of the macrocosm. It is not a betrayal that is secluded to a branch of religious practice. This act associated with the Eucharist finds direct roots in the Arthurian Grail mythos, the traditions of which can be found to exist on an international scale, in multiple versions of stories that all revolve around several key concepts, not the least of which being the Holy Grail. In regard to Western tradition, the Grail mythos is arguably recognized primarily through Richard Wagner's opera Parsifal, which was composed in the mid to late 1800s. It should be noted that Richard Wagner has been recognized as an initiate of the mysteries by the heads of magical orders, such as the Ordo Templi Orientis, which itself is the overarching authority to the Order of the Silver Star, the Rosy Red Cross, or Rosicrucians, and the Golden Dawn. This is to say in a candid manner that the individuals who relay these tales are almost universally recognized throughout the ages as having been initiated into one or more magical societies, such as the Freemasons, who today openly claim to be some 2 million members strong in the United States alone, and whom also openly claim to have initiated 32 former presidents of the United States of America, despite the erroneous information provided by many mainstream sources. Yes, you heard that right. I am not confused in this matter. 32 men out of 45 who have served as presidents have been Freemasons. I relay this information to establish a fact that is overlooked by many in these fields, a fact I personally do not shy away from, but instead have made a point of illustrating as often as possible. These myths and traditions, which play an integral role in the very fabric of society itself, not just in one nation, but for the entirety of the human race, have been fashioned and administered by social engineers. These are tales which are older than history itself, and granted, they are not identical from place to place, but the core essence remains the same. The virtues, the lessons, the effect remains the same, and I must admit, these practices have been administered quite successfully. But from where do they come? Wagner's Parsifal was inspired through Wolfram von Eschenbach's 13th century work, Parzival. This medieval, chivalristic, romantic tradition is typically associated with the Germanic peoples native to northwestern and central Europe. As is often said, nothing happens in isolation. The Germanic peoples are part of the larger linguistic family of Indo-Europeans. The term Indo-European is attributed to Thomas Young, who is said to have coined this term in 1813 in reference to the geographical extremes of the language family, which ranged from Western Europe to North India. A synonym for Indo-European is Indo-Germanic, signifying the family's southeasternmost and northwesternmost branches. The prevailing anthropologic theory regarding the migrations of Indo-European peoples postulates the existence of a common ancestor known as the Proto-Indo-Europeans, or PIE. Quote, the Yamnaya culture, or the Yamna culture, also known as the Pit Grave culture or Ochre Grave culture, was a late Copper Age to early Bronze Age archaeological culture of the region between southern Bug, Dniester, and Ural rivers, dating to 3300 to 2600 BCE, end quote. This region just described is the region just north of both the Black and Caspian Sea, and it is the area that corresponds to modern-day Ukraine. If you've seen my video regarding the evolution of Christmas and its relation to the Black Sun, Micha Varuna, you'll recognize this area as corresponding to the Pontic Steppe. This is the homeland of the ancient Iranian tribes known colloquially as the Scythians and Sarmatians. It is from these people that we find deeper, previously unaddressed roots of the Arthurian mythos. These people were Mithrists, and particularly of the Scythians, they are said to have migrated from Central Asia into the steppe around the 9th century BCE, the Sarmatians having been the dominant faction in the same area a little later, around the 3rd century BCE. These two cultures, in many respects, the Scythians and Sarmatians that is, are identical to one another. They were intermixed, they were diverse, they were not to be thought of as wholly independent of one another whatsoever. There were several confederacies formed over the centuries by these various peoples, the greatest of which was perhaps the Masakate, or the Sakra Tigrakata, which means Scythians with pointed hats. In this vein, the Sarmatians were known, just as the Scythians were, for their competency in mounted warfare, archery, and generally as extraordinarily competent soldiers. It is from these people that comes the invention of scale armor, something that was previously unseen in the Indo-European world. The Sarmatians were known as Sarmat to the Greeks, and they were given a false reading from the Greeks of Saramate, which was done to link the Sarmatians etymologically to dragons and reptilians via the word saur, as in dinosaur. The Europeans were unaccustomed to the sight of people and their mounts covered in scale armor. The Sarmatians also featured the dragon, or Draco, on their war banners and worshipped the dragon, or serpent mother goddess figure, known to the Persians as Anahita. This is the same figure that later became Medusa, and whom is linked directly to Artemis via Al Frothingham, who was the co-founder and first editor of the American Journal of Archaeology, which is the journal of the University of Princeton. Frothingham, in 1911, published a paper titled Medusa, Apollo, and the Great Mother, which goes through great lengths to establish this connection to the serpent goddess of Minoan Crete and Artemis of the Greeks, Cybele of the Phrygians, otherwise known as Demeter, Rhea, Ops, Venus, Ishtar, Isis, etc. This snake, or serpent, or dragon figure is the Typhonian aspect of Mithra, that is, Varuna. This is the aspect of Mithra that later in the character's evolution was split off to form the feminine form of Anahita, or Artemis. This is the dynamic duo representative of the dying and rising god, and they have taken many names indeed. They exist in modern Christianity as Jesus and the Mother Mary. It is evident through anthropology that the Sarmatians much more closely resembled the Germanic Goths than they did their Persian cousins, who had intermixed with the Elamites and Babylonians of Western Asia. To this day, the excavations of tombs around Europe and the Pontic Steppe requires critical analysis to properly distinguish Goths from the Sarmatians, who became known as the Alans during their westward migrations. The word Alan is cognate with Iran, as the letters L and R are interchangeable in the phonetics of Iranian languages, so that Alan is read Aran, with Arayan or Aran simply being another pronunciation of Iran, or Aryan. The Aryans, or Iranians, known as the Alans, clashed against the Roman Empire and were recognized by Marcus Aurelius for their prowess in combat, being distinguished from the German and Celtic barbarians. For this, they were absorbed into the Roman military, where a contingent of 5,000 or so cavalry, composed of Sarmatians, or Alans, was stationed in the Isle of Britain with the task of guarding Hadrian's Wall. These men were put under the leadership of Lucius Artorius Castus, from whose name Artorius comes Arthur, as in the legendary king of the Alans. It is from the Alans that comes the Arthurian traditions of chivalry, the Iranian custom known as Javan Marti or Palavani. The Nart, or Nord, sagas of the North Caucasus serve as the basis of the Arthurian legends, and are kept alive today in the country of Ossetia. Sir Kay, King Arthur's foster brother, one of the first knights of the Round Table, and Gawain, Arthur's nephew and also a knight of the table, are recorded in the Iranian national epic Ferdowsi's Shahnameh as the characters Goi and Kay Kavis. The modern countries of Hungary and Bulgaria were home in ancient times to the Roxolani, which translates to the Shining Alans, or White Alans. These countries retained the Mithraic colors in their national flags. The chivalric Palavani, or Knights in Shining Armor, or Shining Alans. One of them was known as Batraz, and he was known to have pulled a sacred broadsword from a tree. Batraz asked of his companion, Seneg Alder, that his companion throw his sword to the ocean upon his death, just as Arthur asked Perceval to throw his sword to the lake. In both instances, a mystical lady of the water rises from the depths to catch the blade. Iranians had customary traditions involving thrusting swords into the earth, into piles of stones, as a test of strength to then retrieve the sword. The Alans had a mass migration westwards around 400 CE, which corresponds to the fall of the Roman Empire. The Sarmatians, known as the Alans, took charge of the scattered Goths, Franks, and Celts, positioning themselves to fill the function of the aristocracy in the void of leadership following the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And from these Iranians come the bloodline of the Carolingian dynasty. The Carolingian dynasty, founded by Charles Martel, were advisors to the Merovingians and regarded as the de facto power behind the face of the Merovingians who sat on the throne. In 751, the Carolingian dynasty overthrew the Merovingians with the consent of the papacy and aristocracy, and Pippin the Short, son of Martel, was crowned the king of the Franks. In the year 800, the Carolingians re-established the Western Roman Empire, with Charlemagne, grandson of Charles Martel, assuming the title of Roman Emperor in the West, the first to hold this position in 3 centuries. With the Goths, the Alans established Gothalonia in Spain, which later became known as Catalonia. For those unaware, Mons Salvat, or the Mountain of Salvation that Perceval quests to find in the Grail romance, is located in the Pyrenees between Spain and France. France is regarded as a sort of homeland for the Grail mysteries. As demonstrated here in this talk, however, you can now see how these mysteries found their way to France from the Iranian Sarmatians out of the Caucasus region. It is no coincidence that Brand Finnegaid, or Brand the Blessed, the mythical Celtic god, is often referenced as a potential prototype of the Fisher King featured in the Mysteries of the Grail. Celtic art, too, is directly influenced from the Alans. The chimerical lyric patterns featuring griffin and reindeer are seen to have heavily influenced the trademark Celtic weave patterns. The Gaelic text Le Borga Bala Erin claims that the Scots-Irish are of Scythian origin. In northern Iran on the Caspian Sea, the tribe speaks Gaelic and shares other traits with the Celts. I may belabor this point elsewhere, but I will also mention here that in my studies of Brand the Blessed, I found clear links to the dying and rising prophetic god that are associated with all the various cultures surrounding the sides of the Mediterranean Sea. As a brief example, in the second branch of the Mabinogion, Bran was the son of Lear, who was the chieftain god, the god of the seas, perhaps a parallel to Enki. Lear was opposed to the house of Don. Don's husband was named Belenus, god of the sun. Perhaps this is the Enlil figure. Don is an alias for Anu, as in the Mesopotamian god of the sky, Anu. There are, of course, other connections, such as Bran and his direct connection with the vegetation or crops of the land, and some of his symbolism being the raven, which is a known emblem of the sun, and the cornucopia or horn of plenty, which is also commonly associated with many of these figures. Whatever the case, at the very least, the connection of Dawn and Anu coming straight out of the area east of the Mediterranean Sea cannot be denied. With that, I believe I've relayed sufficient information to cover the topic in brief. The point that I wish to convey here is that these traditions that are integral not only to all mystery religions, but to mainstream ones as well, and thus to the fabric of society, are traditions that trace seemingly back to prehistory. That is, these Grail mysteries. I've covered one aspect here, being the Iranian aspect in particular, or rather the Iranian aspect in particular, but the reality is that these traditions very likely trace back much, much further than any Iranian civilization. The key components, for instance, one of them being the mother goddess aspect, is one that exists in the form of Anatanrika, a statue of the rather chubby mother goddess dating back to 5750 BC, that is usually called Kubaba, Kybele by most people. The swastika, another integral component of these mysteries, is associated with the zodiacal wheel in the North Pole, the asterism of time itself, and has been depicted even longer than that. Even longer than Anatanrika, that is. The proof that society has been managed is everywhere evident. The social engineering is evident to those who take the time to see it. There are tendrils that connect every corner of this plane we inhabit, and I do my best to put this forward in a manner so that others can see what I see without being scared to say what I see. We are managed by social engineers. I will leave off here, and I hope you are able to take something from this recording. Until next time, much love.